policy also spoke a lot about value, that we need to find and see the value of free software when comparing it against proprietary software. At the same time, we were really looking at ramping up our e-government strategy, and we saw a lot of benefit that the whole free open source software policy would have on e-government. We can get commodity software at a lower total cost of ownership, but I think here again, total cost of ownership, we really want to look at what is the total value proposition that software offers us. We also had an immediate ability to have proven open source solutions, low or non-existent initial acquisition costs. And I think this is very important in a lot of the projects that we've seen run into trouble. We've seen some departments roll out proprietary software solutions. They try it in a small scale, they like it, they scale it up, but then all of a sudden they don't have budget for backup. They need 3 sites. They've budgeted for 1 site. They haven't paid license. They haven't considered licensing for 3 sites. All of those kinds of issues. I think this has also been covered, but I think from government we felt that it's not just the open source, but it's the openness of the process, the production process, the decision-making process, and the whole participative process that's quite critical. And we felt that this would increase competition, innovation, value, but not only for government, for any end user. And I think at that stage we had just looked at open standards and open source, but slowly we're seeing open cola and now open data. And for government, when we looked at it, we felt that this meant that there's an opportunity for us to really drive interoperability, transparency, innovation, choice, flexibility, collaboration, efficiency, and growth. In 2006, our cabinet, this cabinet is the highest executive authority in the country. They called us back. They said, you adopted this policy in 2003. You had these 3 phrases. What progress have you made? We'd like you to report back. It's at that stage where we're quite embarrassed to say there wasn't much implementation. And I think we realized that there wasn't much implementation because saying there should be a level playing field doesn't mean that there'll be a level playing field. That the ecosystem was very skewed towards proprietary software. That even in government tenders, we could not buy a laptop on a government tender that did not include a proprietary operating system. It was impossible for you to order that on a government tender. So the whole playing field was actually skewed towards proprietary software, and that even though we had adopted the strategy, we had not seen much implementation. So we went back to Cabinet and said, what we'd really like, instead of reporting back to you, is request that you adopt a much stronger policy, that we look at the policy and look at how we can really drive down adoption and implementation. So in 2007, we went back to Cabinet and we asked them to adopt a policy on free software and open standards. And the policy was adopted in February 2007, and it had 5 key points. The first point was choose FOSS. And the policy statement says the South African government will implement FOSS unless proprietary software is demonstrated to be significantly superior. We immediately, after this policy, ran into some issues in terms of how do you define this. And this is something we thought at that stage we would leave the procurement people to sort out. I think that was a bit of a mistake. Our second policy point is that the South African government will migrate current proprietary software to FOSS whenever comparable software exists. So we're using proprietary software and there's a FOSS equivalent, we'll migrate to it. All new software developed for or by the South African government will be based on open standards, adherent to FOSS policy principles, and licensed using a FOSS license where possible. The South African government will ensure all government content and content developed using government resources is made available on open content, unless analysis on specific content shows that proprietary licensing or confidentiality is substantially beneficial. We needed to leave some room in cases of security or where other issues might come up for people to have some leeway of saying we don't think it's appropriate for an open license. But the default, I think, what we try to do with this policy is saying the default should be open, and everything else that you do should be justified. And lastly, we said that not only will government use FOSS, but we will promote the usage of FOSS within the country. After this policy was adopted, we then looked at our open standards framework. We call it the MIOS. It's a handbook for government, and all procurement that has to happen by government must comply with the MIOS. And we're saying that the MIOS at that stage was very important for our ambition to have a joined up and web-enabled government. And the MIOS sets the technical principles and standards for achieving interoperability. And what was very important in the 2007 update we made of this document, we gave a definition of an open standard, and we included ODF, the Open Document Format, as the only document format for government. We also said at that stage that if we didn't manage this properly, we'd land up investing in obsolete, expensive, and non-compatible ICT products, or should I say continue to invest in that. We also at that stage gave a very specific definition of what we thought an open standard is. We said that a standard will judge a standard. There's some standards that we'll have to adopt just for pragmatic reasons, but we need to understand who owns the rights within that standard, how are decisions and how is participation in that standard managed, and what are the intellectual property rights within that standard. At the same stage, we also have a policy. We also want to develop a knowledge economy, and we came up with 10 pillars for what we needed to do to drive this knowledge economy. And Pillar 3 speaks specifically about promoting open source as a platform for supporting locally developed solutions. So those are the 3 policies we adopted within the government. We started off in 2002 as the Government IT Officers Council, and in 2007 these are the policies that our cabinet approved. So it was quite a long road for us, and maybe slow in some cases, but then again for government maybe quite speedy as well. My colleagues from India might agree or disagree there. Even after we then adopted these policies in 2007, I think we're faced still with huge problems. But the one thing we have addressed is the question of awareness. Just need some water. So the challenges that we faced is that although we adopted this policy, there were many processes within government that needed to be changed. So, for example, the procurement process. The procurement process still favored the idea of buying a license. So the idea of changing, of implementing the policy would also have to mean we change the way government procures software. We needed to change many bad habits that were, quite frankly, even against our constitution. Our constitution lays out what is a fair tender process. And yet within the tender process, we have things where we name products. We have a tender that doesn't expire for proprietary software. So it's very hard for open source to compete when the procurement process, thank you very much, actually works against it. Sorry about that. So even the HR process was something that needed to be changed within government. So a typical ad would say, must have experience in Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Word. Or even the incentive program. There is no incentive for an employee in government to belong to an open source project. There is no rewards that really reward anyone within government for participating in any community. So the hiring practices as well were skewed, and I think most importantly our procurement processes have to be changed. And it is quite a challenge because of the way government is to